the back. Can I check that YouTube's working, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for coming to the last Children and Families Select Committee before Christmas. And I think this is the last meeting in County Hall before Christmas as well, so that's why you've all got your coats on. I'm Councillor Sam Smith, and I'm the chair of the committee, and I'd like to welcome you all. This Children and Families Select Committee is being broadcast live and recorded for publication. Item 1 is to note that Councillor Francis Purdy-Horan has been appointed to the committee in place of Councillor David Shaw, and Councillor Purdy-Horan has also been appointed as the Vice Chairman of the committee until the annual meeting of the full Council in May 23. So I'd like to welcome you, Francis, to your position, but also thank Councillor Welsh, who returns to it's the front bench, back bench, but contributed well to this committee during her tenure as Vice Chairman. So thank you for your work during that period. Item 2 is apologies for absence. I hand over to Adrian.
Thank you, Chairman. I have apologies from Councillor Henry, who is substituted for by Councillor Creamer, and from Councillor Corden, who is substituted for by Councillor Carlton.
Thank you, and welcome to those colleagues who have substituted. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest by members of officers. Do any members or officers have any disclosable pecuniary interests? No. Any private interest, pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? No, thank you very much. Item 4 is the minutes of the last meeting held on October 2022, which you have in front of you and have read. I'll move those with a slight amendment to item 5, the third paragraph. It reads in your book that the report noted that there are an unknown number of children who have always been in EHE and were enrolled at school. Well, they're not enrolled at school, that's why we don't know them. So I've added the word not in, and I will move them with that amendment. Yes.
Just a minor typo for my name in the minutes as well.
Thank you, we will get that corrected. Councillor Welsh.
Yes, 2 bullet points from the minutes on page 7 refer to the schools bill. This bill has now been shelved by the government in recent weeks. The committee wouldn't have been able to foresee that. Given that it has been dropped by the government in the last 2 weeks, can we have clarification on whether this has happened, has been started, and whether it will continue? If you look at the bullet points on page 7.
Yeah, so yes, I've read the BBC article on the withdrawal of the schools bill, and it says that there are parts of the schools bill that can continue and be legislated for by amending current legislation rather than introducing new legislation, and part of that is the EHE register, which I think the unions in the teaching world welcomed anyway. So I think that works ongoing, but I will hand over to Peter or Colin or somebody who may know more.
Hi there. So the I think the notification used the term that they were still intending to pursue some of those features, and there's been a voluntary submission already. So we're expecting that to continue. Although we will wait for the clarification about the form that will take over time. Yeah.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Any more comments? No. Francis, would you second the minutes, please, as amended?
Yes.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. We'll get your name corrected. Thank you for that. Item 5 is the Safeguarding and Children Partnership Annual Report, and we're joined by the chief nurse was due to attend, but due to tomorrow's situation, isn't here. Are we joined by anybody else? Yeah. Super. Okay, I will hand over to them then, please, Lawrence. Lawrence, can I just interrupt? Sorry, we can't hear you very loudly. Can we turn the volume up, please, in the back? Try again, Lawrence.
Sorry, is that any better?
Much better, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So the safeguarding partnership replaced the safeguarding board, which we'd had in place for a significant length of time, about 4 or 5 years ago now. And the partnership delivers on Section 11 of the Children Act 2004, and particularly on those elements that are contained in Working Together to Safeguard Children, the last version of which was published in 2018. So that provides a framework for much of the work of the partnership. The partnership itself has 3 statutory safeguarding partners. So that's the local authority, the police, and health in the form of the integrated care board. So previously the CCG, but now the ICB, which has taken over. And there are a number of agencies that are relevant that have to cooperate, although they aren't statutory partners in the partnership itself. So in terms of the purpose of the arrangements locally, I'll briefly go through this list, but there's kind of a wide wish that children are safeguarded and we promote their welfare, that we collaborate across agencies to share and co-own the vision of how to improve outcomes for vulnerable children, that we challenge each other as agencies and hold each other to account in terms of our performance in terms of safeguarding, identification of any new emerging risks that are coming through, so that we recognise them early and respond to them, that we promote learning in a way that improves local services, so that, for example, if there are significant events, either positive or negative, that we take that learning and distribute it through organisations to improve practice more generally, and also that information is shared effectively to facilitate more accurate and timely decision making. So that information sharing components and how we work together across organisations is absolutely key to the strength of the partnership. In terms of how it looks locally, there is a strategic leadership group, which is the most senior group that oversees the partnership. That's made up of the chief nurse, assistant chief constable, and director of children's services, so the 3 statutory partners. And below that, there is a safeguarding assurance and improvement group, which does some of the kind of the engineering doing stuff in terms of recognising areas for improvement and driving through those improvements through the partnership and partner organisations. There's also a child safeguarding practice review group. That group is responsible for rapid reviews when we have serious incidents. So that's quite a short period in terms of making sure that we review those incidents and take the learning away. But also if we have things where we think there's more significant learning, where we do local safeguarding practice reviews, which is where we take much more in-depth learning from organisations and combine it into a single report. You'll see some of those published. They're often the ones that get media attention. There's also a learning and workforce development group. So we have a strong training offer around the partnership that we deliver across not just statutory partners, but those relevant agencies as well, to make sure that everybody is as well informed as they can be around the most up-to-date practices in regards to safeguarding. And that group also links in with the relevant partnership in the city in terms of the safeguarding procedures, which we try and keep consistent across city and county, because many of the bodies cross over banks, so we have a negotiation in terms of that.
Thank you for that introduction, Lawrence. I'm just going to ask Dr. Peel if he has anything to add, and Colin, and then we'll go to questions.
Thank you, Councillor. That's very welcome. Can I just reiterate something that Lawrence has just said? I'm an independent person. I've never worked for Nottinghamshire, and other than my time as an independent scrutineer or safeguarding arrangements, I've had no prior contact with work in Nottinghamshire, although I'm very experienced in the field of safeguarding, having been an independent chair in Leeds and Lambeth, and currently also in Somerset. I can confirm that the arrangements that Lawrence has just talked about are indeed in place and are working well in Nottinghamshire. There are some really good things to tell you about how the partnership is working in Nottinghamshire. First and foremost, let's pick up on the element of the three different agencies holding statutory responsibility for safeguarding. It's important, I know most of you will be aware of this, but it's important just to remind you that these are three equal partners. It's not a price interference relationship, as perhaps was the case previously, with the local authority being in the sort of hot seat of safeguarding. It's a genuine three-way partnership. And like any partnership, that requires consistent and constant communication between the three agencies. And these are three very different agencies with different structures and different cultures. And what I've observed in Nottinghamshire over the period of time I've been your independent scrutineer is a really mature partnership based on trust, strong partnership. There have been some very direct exchanges between the three agencies holding statutory responsibility. But what I see is a clear commitment to improving outcomes for children in the county and some flexible and creative work between those three agencies to accommodate and find ways to take that forward. What I'd also like to say publicly here is, in comparison with other safeguarding partnerships that I'm currently working with or have worked with in the past, I see in Nottinghamshire the best and most collaborative involvement of elected members in the process of safeguarding children locally. What I mean by that is there's very regular attendance by elected members at a range of meetings across the safeguarding landscape, and League members and other elected members are clearly very well informed because they're asking extremely up-to-speed questions of officers who are taking safeguarding forward on your behalf. Last thing from me is just to talk a little bit about rapid reviews and LCSPRs to elaborate on what Lawrence told you. Perhaps for those of you who aren't familiar with this system, it's a bit like the system you would use to survey a house that you were thinking of buying. So rapid reviews are quick. They're a statutory requirement where there has been a serious incident notification, but they're completed within 15 working days. So as a result of that, they're quick, and usually they are of such sufficient quality that they cover the ground that's necessary to be covered to generate learning and understanding of the serious incident that's happened. Where things are particularly complex, or the rapid review hasn't bottomed the particular incident, there's then a second tier. So again, a bit like the full structural review that you might commission for a house, an LCSPR, which goes forward in more detail. When rapid reviews came into being in 2019, I was very worried that completing a review of this sort within only 15 days would compromise the quality. And I was absolutely wrong to have that concern. I was wrong to have that concern nationally, but specifically wrong to have that concern for Nottinghamshire. And the feedback from the national panel, in London, which oversees this system, has been uniformly extremely positive about the quality of rapid reviews and LCSPRs completed in Nottinghamshire. So in sum, as an independent person, I'm seeing a strong and mature partnership holding one another to account, good engagement of elected members, and where things do go wrong and reviews are required, the quality and encompassing membership of those reviews is uniformly good. So it's a strong picture to give you. I don't want to give you the impression that nothing can be improved in Nottinghamshire, because that certainly isn't the case. But I think the structure, the professional relationships, and the commitment of agencies and elected members to take things forward is extremely strong. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Mark. Very reassuring to hear your thoughts there. I'm going to ask Councillor Taylor or Colin if they wish to contribute at this point. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Thanks, Lawrence and Mark, for taking the time to actually explain to the panel members what it is that the partnership does. Grateful always for both the leadership that Lawrence shows in the Officer Corps for leading the various strands of the partnership work, and to Mark for always being a very honest scrutineer. He is challenging, he is candid, he is also supportive, and he helps the partnership to support itself and the children of Nottinghamshire. So grateful to be receiving this annual report today, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Any questions on that, Councillor Welsh?
Yeah, can I just make the first point with regards to receiving a presentation on the day of the meeting and not before? I think it's unacceptable for a scrutiny meeting, to be quite honest, because there was information in there that would saved us a lot of time when we were going through the paperwork. Also, it wasn't clear to see the writing on that presentation at all either when it was up there. Now, I don't know if that is my eyes or something like that, but if there's a presentation, can we have it either sent as soon as it's ready, or ideally with the reports is my first point. There was something that I missed on the presentation. I'd just like to ask that question before I make another point. Councillor Taylor, are you on the strategic leadership group?
Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, the mic wasn't cooperating. It's happy. Not on the strategic leadership group, no. I'm on the what we call the SAGE group, Strategic Advisory and Information Group, I think, Improvement Group, beg your pardon. So elected members are not on the leadership group because the partnership is the Officer Corps from the 3 partnership areas.
Right, so if I go back to the report that is in front of me, and we had a read of last year's report so we could compare what was what. And last year's report had 20 actions within it, none of which are addressed within this report. So there was 20 actions in last year's report. I've got them all here. You can read through them if you want. But for example, an update on the progress in relation to the safeguarding priorities 22 to 23 and the key areas of work to take forward. One of those was a review completed partner action plans and monitor progress for the formation of a joint child neglect working group. Has that been done? Develop a comprehensive and clear set of measures which effectively demonstrates the impact of work on neglect in the short and long term, early indicators of success, etc., etc. So there's 20 action points that were in the previous report that by reading this report, I don't know whether they've been met or not. So from a scrutiny point of view, there's this bit of information, a considerable amount of information, I have to say, that's not in here. None more so with regards to COVID as well, which was cited in the previous report as the impact not being known to what that will have on children. It's just not included in this report. So my question is, why is this report different in its makeup? Why aren't we addressing those 20 action points? Are those action points no longer exist? And if so, can we be clear about that? Because what I'm not clear about from this report that is in front of me is what has happened since last time with regards to all of those action points that many of us put our hand up in the CY Children and People's Committee about. And I think that is all that I've got on here. That's all I've got for the moment. But yeah, the 20. What I'd like to know is the 20 action points. I'd gladly give you my notes, the 20 action points, but they're not answered within this report. There's therefore a lack of information and a difference of information from the last report, which makes it very, very hard to scrutinise.
Thank you, Councillor Welsh. And I suppose because it's a historic report, you could make the same point next year, that we're looking back at a year rather than actually how we're progressing towards those priorities. So that's something we could look into doing, reviewing a live document rather than a historic one. I'll pass over to Lawrence, I think, to answer the question about how we're getting on with the priorities last year.
So just to make it clear, this is the annual report for last year, and the report that's being referred to is the one for the year before. So in terms of the sequencing of this, it's quite far out of kilter, and it's worth saying that the report itself is a report to the national panel, so that forms the basis of the report, and we have various communications with the national panel on updates. So I exactly take the point that from a public facing point of view, unless you were to go through perhaps some of the documentation that we've had through SAGE and through the SLG, through this document, you might not see it. The national panel will have sight of progress through a whole number of things that we do. But you're right in terms of the clarity on those action plans. They're not contained in this version of the annual report, and the annual report has changed over time. Largely because we've had changes in approach and changes in leadership in terms of some of those areas as well. But if there's an update needed on specific items in terms of there's concern about progress in particular areas, then we can certainly answer those either today, or if there are particular ones that need picking up, then we can certainly give information on those as well.
Thank you for that, Councillor Creamer.
Yeah, just on that. Pardon me. Bit of sore throat here. The concern is admitted that it's not a live document. Well, that's strange in itself because it was live up until that point. But any alterations, any new information should be given to the public as well. So it shouldn't just be sent to council. There should be at least another document or appear somewhere so the public. This is a public document to keep the public informed, not just us. And there's admitting that there's bits that aren't in there. Doesn't have to be in great detail, but there should be information in there that the public can readily address and see. So that's my concern on what was just said. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. To help Lawrence, I don't know if this is possible, but say in could this committee have an update report on progress being made towards any activity that the partnership are doing in the current year, so 23-24 it will be, will it, or 22-23? Is that possible? And then have the annual report as well to look back at the year?
I don't think there's any obstacle to us coming and answering questions. We don't have documents as such. As I say, the annual report is has a specific purpose, which is that each partnership needs to submit it to the national panel. So that's the purpose of the report, and has been the purpose of the report since the partnership was convened. And I guess with scrutiny being new, so select committee providing this scrutiny, that's a different take on that document, and one probably that we need to be mindful of, realising that what the needs might be of scrutiny through select committee as well as through the report to the national panel. So I think we'd be very happy in terms of a partnership to provide updates on any elements, actually. And as I say, well, we can take questions on specific elements today if there were ones of concern, but we'd have to think through what the mechanism would be, I think, in terms of being able to report to committee on live progress, because bits of it will take different time. And of course, it's not the local authority, it's the scrutiny over all three partners, health, police and local authority.
I think that colleagues would find that helpful. I think. Yes, Councillor Walsh.
Can I just ask where these 20 priorities are discussed and when it is looked at by officers, and we've said that elected members are involved, when are these 20 priorities looked at and when do they say, yeah, that is being met, that isn't being met? That's the question that I'm asking. There was 20 priorities in a document that came to a committee meeting where we all put our hand up and everyone was in that and said, yes, we agree those should be the priorities. We've got a following year, not this year's, a following year's report that doesn't address any of those 20 priorities. So where is the information written down that says that these 20 priorities have been met since they were written down in the first place? That should exist somewhere, shouldn't it? Is it discussed in the strategic leadership group meeting? Where is it discussed? And where is the decision made when something like COVID, where in the previous report you were saying we don't know what the impact's going to be, then just doesn't figure at all in the next report? There isn't even saying, well, actually, we've looked at it. So can we please, like that? That's the information that I think we need as a scrutiny committee. And as you said, this is a scrutiny committee. It's not a committee. We're not a panel or a board. We need to know what's happening with regards to safeguarding. At the moment, the previous report, this report doesn't reflect the last report. And it is as simple as that.
Mark, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, first and foremost, the question is welcome, and I'll try to address a number of them that have come up. Let's just take a step back to a question that was asked as to whether Councillor Taylor sits on the SLG, the Senior Leadership Group within the Partnership for Nottinghamshire. Tracy answered that directly to say she doesn't. I should say to you that across the country, I'm not aware of any equivalent body. They have slightly different names, but it functions as an executive in the way that the one in Nottinghamshire does. I'm not aware of any circumstances where elected members sit directly on those committees. So Nottinghamshire is not an outlier as far as that is concerned. Just to go on from there, SLG functions, Senior Leadership Group functions as in an executive capacity as far as the priorities in the first annual report that you're talking about. And the group referred to by Lawrence as SAIG is the sort of engine room, I think that's the expression he used, whereby the executive direction they get from SLG is turned into actions. So the priorities that are specified in the report that you're talking about are indeed live between those two groups. And certainly I have seen them being progressed, not just across the previous year, but in the 2 years prior to that. So in terms of evidencing what you're looking for, which I think is a really welcome question, and particularly the question about it being available to the public transparently, yes, it should be possible to give you a report as to what the status of those priorities is currently, and also do that in live within the course of a year. But the minutes of SLG and the minutes of SAIG would also provide very considerable detail as to how those priorities have been pushed forward over the course of whatever period of time you wish to see. Last thing from me, there was a brief point about the effect of COVID, which I have written about for elected members, but I'll just reiterate very briefly here. Across the country, we were extremely concerned that the impact of COVID on the most vulnerable children, particularly looked after children, our children as they're referred to in Nottinghamshire, would be profound, and that services wouldn't be able to function in a joined up way under very extreme circumstances and circumstances that hadn't been rehearsed previously. Nottinghamshire moved forward in a very proactive way as far as COVID was concerned. SAIG, the group that I've just been talking about, the chair of SAIG, Lawrence, made a decision to meet more regularly so that we could keep on top of what was going on. And some very creative things were put into being as far as supporting children and their families within Nottinghamshire, particularly the use of new technology. That I think reflects well on Nottinghamshire. One thing to talk to you about as a person perhaps who comes from a generation not as used to ICT as younger people and the children we support are, was the research we did subsequently across the country showed us that actually children and young people loved using social media, loved attending meetings directly, found that easier in some cases, in fact, in most cases, than attending directly and personally. And attendance at meetings, particularly by young people and their families, actually went up through COVID. So not only are there good things to talk about as far as Nottinghamshire is concerned, but some really interesting things in terms of how we, as a partnership, adapt our services, not just to flex back to what we're used to doing and revert to what was done 2 or 3 years ago, but to look at what worked particularly well across the period of the lockdown and through COVID, and to see if we can be as flexible now and as creative now as we were during that very difficult period. But I'll finish where I started. The question from elected members is welcome. And I think we can provide you with good detail of the evidence that you're understandably asking for.
Detailed response. Just on, you referred to minutes of the meetings. How do members access those?
I think Lawrence might be better placed to answer that than me. I see meeting minutes from both SLG and SAIG, so I assume they can be made available certainly within the council to anybody who wants to see them. Am I right in suggesting that, Lawrence?
Yes, I don't see why not. I'm just trying to think in terms certainly of the minutes for the SAGE and majority of those for the SLG and workforce and learning. I think the answer is yes. With regards to the safeguarding practice review, my guess is that some of those can't be because they would contain confidential information, but certainly the outputs in terms of rapid reviews and practice reviews, overview reports certainly can be made available.
Thank you. We'll try and get that as a recommendation so we can work out a method of people accessing those, because I'm guessing they're not on the County Council website like the normal ones. Colin and then Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, Chair. And if I may, I speak to you both as the chair of this strategic leadership group. Yeah, so I chair the group that is independently scrutineered as per mandatory guidance by Dr. Peel, yeah, with the Assistant Chief Constable and senior officers from Health, yeah, as well as the Corporate Director for Children's Services. I'm a little confused. I'm going to have to ask Councillor Welsh to help me, because I've got both the annual report for last year open and the annual report for this year that you're considering. Yeah. The business plan is a 3-year business plan for 2021, 21-22 and 22-23. Today is the middle year of that 3-year business plan that you're considering in an annual report. The annual report for 2020-2021, year 1, yeah, had 7 priorities that from the previous year that focused down on 3 subsequent priorities, which is contained within year 2's annual report, which is the annual report today. I'm not recognising 20 priorities.
7 priorities, 20 actions.
Sorry, 20 actions. Sorry, I thought it said it was 20 priorities. Yeah. Yeah. My apologies. I thought I heard 20 priorities. Okay. So I think that the annual report does cover, yeah, what was 7 priorities down to 3 priorities and 20 actions. Yeah. If this committee wishes us to go to the detail of the progress against those 20 action points, against those three priorities, yeah, in more detail than is covered in the annual report, we'll of course do that. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's probably the way forward. Councillor Lee, please.
Chairman, you beat me to it, so it's fine.
That was easy. Thank you very much. Any further comments on this, Councillor Colton, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your welcome to your committee this morning. And apologise if my voice conks out. I think I've caught Councillor Creamer's cough as well. Just wanted to turn to page 9 of the appendix report, specifically around the MASH, the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub. Obviously, and this is something that I've seen in adults as well, but the year 21-22 saw continued pressures in terms of inquiries being made to said MASH. So it's a two-part question, and I suppose the first one may sound a little bit odd, but it's come to the point that the MASH has also almost become sort of a victim of its own success, and by what that I mean is that there's a greater awareness out there in society across the partnerships that some of the things that these reports allude to, or things that we've seen in the national press happening around the country, are completely abhorrent. I think we can all agree on that. So, is that sort of fueling some of the referrals? My second question to that would also be across the partnership, does they also need to be sort of a greater understanding and probably further training and development work into what does actually need to be referred across? As obviously the report does further go on to say that a number of the inquiries that led to no further action. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Colton. Great question on your first committee, you see straight in. Lawrence, please.
Yes, so certainly in terms of the MASH, I think there are long-standing understanding that there is an issue there in that a larger percentage than we'd want of work that gets referred through there doesn't require further action in terms of either social workers or police officers making statutory investigations. So we do know that there is an issue in terms of organisational understanding across public and voluntary sector in terms of what should be referred. So we're aware of that and have been working on that for a number of years with varying degrees of success, if we're honest. I think there are some places, particularly during COVID, where the pressures on particular parts of health meant really without our services, etc., it wasn't always possible to draw on the safeguarding expertise in those organisations to perhaps shape those in the way that we would have liked. So there is work to be done around those thresholds. That said, what we're trying to do currently is rethink actually what the front door to the whole variety of children's services looks like, to make it more needs-led rather than thinking around thresholds and whether things cross over. So the idea is to re-engineer the front door to children's services. So what we say is, here is a child and family with needs. How and who best meets those needs? And we reserve the MASH actually for those cases that are child protection, that need a child protection response rather than a response just simply to help a family or a child meet a particular need. So we're trying to turn it on its head a little bit. That's quite a significant piece of re-engineering, but we expect to make progress on that over the next 12 months, and it links very clearly to the work that we're doing, both as a partnership but also within the council in terms of the whole family safeguarding programme that we've got running in the department.
Thank you for that question and answer. Councillor Purdy-Horan and then Councillor Creamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is incredibly important work, and it's taken me a while to get stuck into this. But I spotted on page 4 of the report at the bottom, it was disappointing to see that the council was not successful in its bid to the Family Hubs Transformation Fund. I've been looking at the successful bidders, which includes the relatively prosperous areas of Solihull and Cheshire East councils, which perhaps suggests that more needs to be done to make the case to bring more money in to tackle this important work. What plans do we have to bid for further funding, and what lessons do you think we've learned from the failed bid last year moving forward? That's my first question. The appendix, the appendix contains some highly distressing rapid reviews that have been completed. As the report states on page 12 of the appendix, 3 of the reviews related to death or physical harm by suspected non-accidental injury to young babies under 3 months, including a hanging and a stabbing. Later on page 12, it states, when looking at the impact that COVID may have had in each of these distressing situations, there was impact noted in all 7 reviews of the reduction in face-to-face contact with professionals. Now, whilst I accept that COVID will obviously have played a major part, can you update the committee on the statement which says there has been an increased focus on returning to face-to-face working across the partnership, whilst retaining some of the benefits of remote working for professionals? And finally, Mr. Chairman, as a corporate parent, it is incredibly important to get engagement correct and meet the needs of some of our most vulnerable children. Do you feel the lack of resources exacerbated by the failure to secure funding played a part in any of these case reviews?
Thank you for those questions. I believe the cabinet member gave a response at full council on family health funding once, but I might be wrong. Colin, you want to come in on those, do you?
Yes, sir. If I may, Chair, I was just trying to work out the colour coordination of the microphone, flashing green. So, Family Hubs is about early help and support to families. It shouldn't be confused, I don't think, with necessarily child protection and safeguarding, which is stronger. We were unsuccessful. My understanding is that we were just unsuccessful. So if you stacked the 152 local authorities, top tier local authorities in the country, the government were able to fund the first tranche of Family Hubs to be supported financially, and Nottinghamshire just didn't make the cut. In that it was using government formula, which was published, as to how they reached their decision. We just didn't quite make that cut. And Family Hubs are often used within the same sentence and description as children's centres and the Sure Start children's centres at the turn of the century. I think one of the things that we forget about children's Sure Start centres is that it took 2000 to 2008 for children's centres to be introduced across England and across the local authorities that it needed. It wasn't. It was introduced over 8 tranches. So on the first tranche and second tranche of the Family Hubs, we've not been successful, but only just, I think. That hasn't stopped us doing the work that we think we need to do to organise ourselves in a way that helps and support families more effectively. And I think this speaks back to, and I think it's Councillor Carlton's comment with regards to the number of children and people who are referred to the multi-agency safeguarding hub is something like 10 times more than is referred to our early help. And what we would want to see is more and more agencies like schools, like health, like other strategic partners, referring more families for help rather than for concerns. You're more likely, if you're a child or a family in Nottinghamshire, to be referred to the multi-agency safeguarding hub than you would be in a similar sized local authority with similar demographics. But you're no more likely to be subject of a child protection case conference, or indeed be subject to child protection plan, or indeed become looked after, indeed less likely. And 66% of those contacts that come into the multi-agency safeguarding hub result in no further action. So I think we've and I think Lawrence has outlined the work that we need to do there, and we're in the middle of doing for that work too. Dr. Peel and Lawrence Jones sign off the rapid reviews before they go into the national review panel. Yeah, the national review panel's contentness and satisfaction, yeah, with both the timeliness of those reviews and the content of those reviews is consistently high. Yeah, but I'll pass over to either Lawrence or Dr. Peel to respond with regards to the rapid reviews that Councillor Punderhuron has raised.
Lawrence, shall I take this one forward? Yeah, thanks. I referred to rapid reviews in something I said earlier, and I just reiterate what Colin's just told you, that the feedback from our national panel colleagues is very positive. But it's a very useful question from the councillor who said, I'm putting words in his mouth here, that it was distressing reading the rapid reviews. Perhaps I forget, because I read 100 or so of these a year from across the country, what it must be like to read one of those for the first time, or without the backdrop that perhaps some of the officers around Nottinghamshire have got. They are inherently very, very distressing. We write rapid reviews only in circumstances where children have been very badly injured or worse. So they can be very difficult for all of the people who are involved in putting them together to actually think through and write through. So perhaps some context is needed to my observation that they were good, because in that sense it sounds awful. And I don't wish to be glib about very difficult circumstances for individual families and children. What I'm talking about is how I observe the partnership in Nottinghamshire responding to the most difficult of circumstances, making the significant injury notifications in the first instance, taking forward the rapid reviews as a statutory responsibility and completing them within the very demanding 15-day timescale, and extracting from the most difficult of circumstances any learning, which can be quite pointed and very difficult for individual officers and individual agencies to take on board. So I think there's a competent and transparent and mature process which results in good quality rapid reviews, and there is support for staff dealing with what are always distressing circumstances. So I just wanted to give a little balance to something I said earlier on. Lawrence, do you want to say anything more?
No, I mean, I've just added in a little bit around the question around whether there were issues of resource availability in terms of any of the rapid reviews. I don't think there has been. There was one question raised around whether there, I think, about the Safeguarding Insurance Improvement Group satisfying itself that in terms of intensive early help, that it was available when needed. That was a kind of parallel theoretical question, actually, based on a case where parents had refused that help, but there was a question around if they'd accepted it, whether there was sufficient in place. And I think the understanding at the end of that is that there is sufficient in place, had it been wanted in that particular case, which was one that also went through an inquest and was questioned by the coroner. So other than that, I'm not aware in any rapid reviews, Mark will correct me if I'm wrong, that there was anything in terms of resource availability being one of any of the issues in terms of the outcomes of those cases.
You're not wrong.
Thank you. Do you want to come?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, and I do appreciate. There are very few areas of the work that public services are involved in that is as sensitive as looking after vulnerable children, of course. But can I just come back and just probe with regard to face-to-face working? We've had the COVID interruption. Is that really sort of beginning to get back on track?
So yes, all face-to-face working direct with children and families is completely back on track. One of the things we have started to do, though, is to have a look, particularly where we had multi-agency meetings for children. There were huge advantages through the adoption of things like Teams in terms of professionals who perhaps otherwise wouldn't have been able to travel and attend meetings have been able to. So what we're trying to do is bring together the best of what we've done in terms of those hybrid meetings and alongside the return to face in terms of direct work with children and families. So there are still aspirations that we have in terms of how we run some of those, particularly child protection meetings, to make the very best actually of what we've got. So we've got a little bit of a way to go to make sure that some of the changes to our buildings and our technology fully support that. But by and large, certainly in terms of, say, direct work with children and families, yes, that's fully back to face to face.
Page 19 of the report from the early help strategy. And obviously one of its 4 areas is to be community resilient. Given rising demand for services and developing resilient communities effectively, meaning basically more volunteers as opposed to, and it should, can you hear me? Yeah. Should go alongside volunteers really. And I think we need to put some more emphasis on professionals being alongside some of these workers. Obviously, it says that, you know, you've delivered several parenting courses, but these parenting courses, I would like to think they don't replace the Blueprint parenting courses that are internationally and nationally recognised, such as Strengthening Families, Incredible Years, Non-Violent Resistance. And so my questions, it's 2-part really. How many of these courses, so the Incredible Years, the Blueprint courses that Notts County Council signed up to delivering, how many are we delivering at this moment in time? And how many of the volunteer-led programmes include professional support? And by that, I don't mean a professional in the building, I mean a professional at the side of a parent that's leading on these courses. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Lawrence.
I can't provide you with a direct answer in terms of the numbers. I haven't got the numbers to hand, but some of the new evidence-based programmes are intended to be delivered either through the NHS or the local authority by volunteers, and that's the model and what the evidence base is for some of those. And I think the feeling is that whilst being effective, they also reduce stigma and they also use the kind of knowledge within parents in local communities to deliver that. So there is still delivery of a range of other traditional older programs as well. But I say a lot of the modern ones rely on this model of professional training for volunteers and for those peer volunteers to deliver to other parents. I think everything's still under review. And of course, we're doing lots of work, as we said, around needs-led front door, around family hubs. So that whole early help piece, not just across the local authority, but also within partner organisations as well. So all of that in terms of effectiveness will be kept under review. And certainly with the family hubs where we have the design site in Retford, a lot of the questions there are for the community in terms of what the community wants in terms of provision and what they think will be effective for them. But we still will do have plenty of parenting professionals delivering on some of those traditional parenting courses as well. I will ask if we can get some numbers from the Early Help Executive to pass that on to you, Councillor Callahan.
Yeah, I'd just like to come back on that if I can. My concern there is lots of families that attend parenting programmes are very complex and they come with multifaceted issues. So they're not just attending a parenting programme. There's lots of things that lead off. And when, lead, whoever the lead worker is that's delivering that, they need to be able to respond rather than acting with shock. So what support and what training have these workers been given? So I'll give you an instance. In one of the parenting programs I was delivering, the parent actually divulged that they were being raped on a regular basis. Had that been just somebody that hadn't got that expertise and knowledge, that would have wrecked that whole program.
Yeah, I mean, there's professionals involved in all of these programs, either from the family service or children's centre services in the local authority, or from NHS partners. So there's always professionals on hand, and these are by and large are taking place in settings where there are other workers around. It's simply the delivery of the programme, we say with some of the models, is volunteer led, but there's plenty of support for those volunteers and for anybody who needs additional support in addition to the parenting program itself.
Okay, thank you. There's three more people on my list. So, Councillor Creamer, please.
Yes, again, pardon me. Thank you, Chair. Going back to again the previous report on the priorities, and it is the priority, which may actually link in some respects to the rapid reports, etc. Priority 5 from the previous report was develop technical solutions providing child protection plan, data to the police, frequency and times, etc., etc. Identify what information sharing systems that need to be in place. So I'd just like to know where we are on those two actions, which would seem to be pretty crucial to the new system regardless. And priority 6 from the previous one was further explanation led to access to services. Where are we on that particular one? So those priorities from the previous one, I think one would almost directly link into the rapid reports at the moment, whether I'm right or wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. Colin?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Creamer, for your question. I thought the committee had agreed that we would respond to the 20 action points within the 7 priorities that are in the 3 priorities for this year through a subsequent report to Council.
Yes, and that's going to be one of the resolutions to this discussion, yes. Councillor Lee, then we'll finish with Councillor Darby, please.
Chairman, thank you. A few questions that I picked up from the conversation is I just want to clarify that we do have enough staffing. It's something that we picked up in many meetings where we have had gaps in staffing. MASH in particular, we are aware that they are overstretched and they're getting lots and lots of referrals. And I want to double check, are you still able to self-refer in that? Because I know that was when I worked for them, we had lots of self-referrals. So I'm just going to ask that at the moment. I might come back.
Colin again.
Thank you, Chair. And the workforce is a significant priority across, I was going to say all public sector, organisations, whether that's teaching, health, or indeed services like children's social care. Challenges around that are well documented. Things that we're trying to do about that are well documented. It is a challenge. Do we have enough social workers doing social work job? Not without going to the independent sector, and asking for agency staff at significant additional cost. Similar with education psychologists, similar with bank nurses, similar with teaching too. And sorry, there was a specific question in there, Councillor Lee, which I've self-referrals. Oh, self-referrals. Yeah, I'll ask Lucy, who's doing a piece of work around reviewing of that front door, to respond to that, if I may. Sorry.
Thanks, Colin. The MASH governance group, which oversees the performance of the MASH, meets regularly. They met last week and received assurance from partners within the MASH that current staffing levels are okay in order to meet the current levels of inquiries that are being received. So whilst, as Colin describes, there are challenges, the current situation is that the MASH is performing effectively. In terms of self-referral, yes, self-referral is an option, both to the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub and to the Early Help Unit. And in the work that we're doing on the future model, that will also look at making sure that both children and families themselves are able to self-refer effectively, but also that we're able to provide that advice to professionals working with children and families so that they can access the right support for families as quickly as possible.
Appreciate that, Chairman. No more questions.
Thank you. Just on agency that Colin referred to, members, there was an email circulated last week that detailed Nottinghamshire County Council's use of that, so do take a read. Councillor Darby, to finish, please.
So yeah, thank you, Chair. So do you think that these rising figures may be just the tip of the iceberg? I want to tell you about my story. My son suffers from special educational needs. Sorry. And I have repeatedly told school that he needs more help. I'm happy to raise these concerns privately. But after becoming frustrated with the school's response, I contacted County Council, and while they were helpful, I faced a further... Sorry, I can't do it.
Councillor Darby, can I just interrupt? I think you're on the next agenda item, so
I'm sorry.
If we get to that, it might allow you to read further. I appreciate that it's an emotional, personal topic. Are you okay if we wait for that? Thank you. I'm going to thank you, colleagues, for that discussion and debate. I think we've captured a lot, so I'm going to look at Mr. Elliott for recommendations, and hopefully that's encapsulated what everyone's spoken about.
So, quite a few. So, the first one is that the Nottinghamshire Safeguarding Children Partnerships Annual Report 21-22 be noted. And then that the following issues raised by the committee in its consideration of the report be progressed. So, the first one is that the Children and Families Select Committee continue to review the work of the Nottinghamshire Safeguarding Children Partnership by receiving and considering its annual report each year. Secondly, that a briefing note be circulated to members of the Children and Families Select Committee on the current status of the key priorities and actions as detailed in the 2020-21 annual report. Thirdly, that all members of the Children and Families Select Committee receive, as they become available, all of the minutes of the meetings of the Safeguarding Partnership that do not include information, that do not include confidential information. I think that one will need tidying up slightly. Fourthly, that information on the number of attendees and the number of parenting courses delivered via the early help offer be circulated to members of the Children and Families Select Committee. And then finally, that the independent scrutiny of the Nottinghamshire Safeguarding Children Partnership attend the June 2023 meeting of the Children and Families Select Committee to present a report on the current activities of the partnership and on the progress being made towards its strategic priorities.
Thank you for capturing those. I think some of those recommendations really do encapsulate the request for reviewing ongoing progress in the current year that is. So if that has captured everything, I will move those recommendations. If Francis will second, please. All those in favour of those recommendations, please show. Thank you. Abstain and against. So that's carried. Yeah. Thank you. We will now move on to item 6. Councillor Darby, I'll introduce you first, but Councillor Welsh was offered to read your question out if that's of assistance. So item 6 is the special educational needs and disability provision and sufficiency. I'm going to ask the Cabinet Member for Children and Families, Councillor Taylor, and the Service Director for Education to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. You've got the report in front of you. I don't think there's anything else for me to introduce other than for Mr. McConaughey to go into the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The presentation, apologies, it's I think we're learning the new process, but the presentation is highlights from the report which you should have in the pack. So I don't think there's any new information within this. It should be excerpts to draw attention to the committee. So in terms of some of the key highlights I wanted to bring to your attention, there's a number of factors currently that lead to an increased demand in the system around special educational needs and disabilities, which are listed for you in terms of the children with complex needs that are increasing over time. The government legislation has very low thresholds for education and healthcare assessments following the 2014 reforms. There's a need now to plan for children with SEND until they're aged 25 into adulthood, and there's a clear focus in schools on raising attainment levels. Sometimes that comes at the expense of inclusive practice, which adds into the pressure in this area. Alongside that, a lack of trust and confidence by peers, carers, and sometimes teachers in terms of the provision for children with special educational needs and disabilities in the education system that we are working within. The graph here shows the number of EHC, education healthcare plans in Nottinghamshire, and the increase over time and the predicted increase through to January 25. It's important to note that an education health and care plan is required for access to specialist provision. However, in Nottinghamshire, the funding and resource should be made available to mainstream schools to meet and support the needs of children with additional needs in those settings as part of a graduated response, and it should only be necessary for an EHCP to access a special school place. The needs should be able to be met at a local level. There has been nearly a 60% increase in EHC plans in Nottinghamshire between January 2017 and 2022. Nationally, that increase has been 64.7% over the same period. And on average, of all of those requests and new EHCPs, 42% of them name special provision as an outcome of the plan. So I mentioned around parental confidence. Many parents and carers apply through the EHC assessment process as a way of providing some certainty regarding the educational provision and support available for their child as they move through education. Often arise towards the end of Key Stage 2 because of concerns around what the secondary education experience might be. So we see peaks in terms of assessments requests coming in. The first 11 months of this year has seen an increase of 32% in terms of the number of requests for EHC assessments compared with the same time in 2021. And that increased demand for EHC assessments has an impact on pressure within local authority services. And we see that most notably with our educational psychology service and our integrated children's disability service and our children's commissioning service. We have got Charles Savage, our group manager for educational psychology and inclusion services, with us today remotely, who may be able to pick up queries around some of that should it arise. Also, there's significant financial implications in terms of meeting the additional need for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and the high needs block of the Designated Schools Grant funds our SEND provision. The graph shows you the level of funding that has been attracted to Nottinghamshire over time. Historically, Nottinghamshire, for its size and makeup, was underfunded compared with statistical neighbours, and you'll see that over the last few years there's been a significant rise in funding for Nottinghamshire. Nottinghamshire has historically managed its high needs budget very successfully. A cumulative deficit last year of 0.6%, whereas other local authorities struggle significantly to manage their high needs block funding. One example would be that Kent County Council, which has been well publicised, had a cumulative debt which amounted to the same as Nottinghamshire's entire high needs block by the end of last year. So it is a well managed funding block within Nottinghamshire to get the best outcomes. In terms of our proficiency, provision and sufficiency, we currently have 11 special schools and academies which generates just under 1,200 places of specialist provision in Nottinghamshire, and that was at January 2022. And we do have a lower number of special schools compared with other parts of the country in terms of population size. Since 2016, the number of places available in Nottinghamshire special schools, both in maintained special school provision and academies, has increased by just less than 23%. So it was 945 in 2016, and it's now 1170. Of those 11 special schools and academies, 91% are rated as good and outstanding by Ofsted. And there's also, in addition to the 11 schools, there are 6, 5 in secondary, 1 in primary, enhanced provision units within mainstream schools to add to that support available. Now there's clearly, as you saw from the number of EHC plans, there's clearly a growing need for specialist placement. 42% of plans have special school provision as a requirement. That means that we have an increased reliance on the independent sector in terms of provision of places where we can't meet that need within our own special school estate. We currently have 9% of children with EHCs within the independent sector. And nationally, that's 6.2%. So we are seeing an increasing number of children accessing that. The average cost of a placement in an independent setting is higher than that within a Nottinghamshire special school or academy considerably. I think the average cost is 49,000 compared with just under 24,000 for a Nottinghamshire special school place. So having the right level of places available helps us to manage the budget more effectively rather than relying on external placements. There's also, it's an overly saturated market, the independent special school market. So looking for independent non-maintained places, they can be hard to find as well as expensive. And we see the same with the alternative provision market, where there's an increased demand to use alternative provision to meet short-term need whilst awaiting a more stable placement for a young person with special educational needs. The other pressure of the demand outstripping the capacity is the pressure that puts back onto mainstream school settings. Young people are left at risk of permanent exclusion, and schools feel the pressure of trying to meet the needs of a small number of young people who would benefit from the provision that's named within their plan. So demand is high. As a county council, we're responding to that demand, and we do have a place planning strategy that runs from 2021 to 2026, and the strategy identifies some key targets. One being the provision of additional places within the specialist provision sector, and between 285 and 490 is the predicted level of new places required. It's a bit of a movable feast, really. So I think 285 would be realistic. 490 is a very safe estimate of where it could be in terms of places, but it's within that range. Additional specialist provision, particularly for children and young people with autism and social, emotional, and mental health needs, as we're seeing that's a higher prevalence of need within the county. And we're also keen to ensure that additional places are focused where the need is great. So referring back to the Green Paper consultation, and the right support at the right place at the right time for children in the right area is really important as well. So trying to match the demand and the capacity at the same time. So we are looking at additional places currently being focused on the Mansfield and Ashfield area, where you can see that the volume of education healthcare plans is significantly higher than other parts of Nottinghamshire currently. So the SEND place planning strategy also stresses the importance of high quality provision. Now I've mentioned the Ofsted grading of the majority of the special schools within Nottinghamshire being good and outstanding, which is really helpful in terms of securing the best quality of education for children with additional needs. We also have looked at structures and trying to make decision making rather than centering it all within County Hall, trying to get decision making and accountability happening more effectively at a more localised level, so fitting in with those areas of need and provision of spaces in special schools, also working around local authority services, school representatives, working together within local areas, within districts, through locality working boards. So we're moving to a localised education healthcare plan consultation placement panel within areas, and that rolls out from January. We've got a network of district SENCOs and family SENCOs working with secondary schools and the primary schools that would naturally feed into those secondary schools to make sure that funding decisions are made locally, that support is available, and the mainstream special educational needs coordinator support is strengthened at a local level. And that helps to develop a stronger understanding of locality through having the right data available and the right expertise. But it also is about local solutions to those local challenges and ensuring that there's not duplication and that partners can work effectively together. We have put an application in for a new free school, special educational needs free school. That's part of Wave 40 of the free school programme, and we're still awaiting some further news from the Department for Education with regard to that. But that would bring in some really welcomed resource in terms of establishing additional provision. And then the SEND Place Planning Strategy, which is referred to within the PAC, also identifies the need to develop SEND resource units within existing school sites. And that can be a really cost-effective way of ensuring that the right support is available within mainstream school settings and reducing that demand further. I've put in, and this is in the report as well, just a summary of the current capital projects, because obviously if we're going to have the right level of provision available, we need to build that, we need to establish that. So the current projects that are being delivered are listed here, and that will bring an additional 271 spaces within the special school estate. A number of the projects are being delivered this month and will now be reaching completion. And between January and March, we'll begin to see those places being made available to children and young people where they're named on their plans. The reference to Ravensdale, which is in pre-development, that's also a potential free school bid, which would bring in some of the funding towards that development. Clearly, if you're doing the maths, you'll think 271, potentially 498. There's still going to be a shortfall there, and that's where we currently are. Okay, so we've got some of that delivery, but this is a strategy that will last for a number of additional years. So, kind of looking forward, it's really important that we await the outcome of the special free school application, because it could be a considerable level of funding that we currently have from our capital invested in that, or potentially invested in that we would then be able to reutilise for additional provision. There's also a new kind of focus on alternative provision free schools, and with the FE are pushing partnership between local authorities and multi-academy trusts to provide AP free schools. So there's currently a bidding round open, and there's a number of multi-academy trusts within Nottinghamshire who are talking to us around their expressions of interest and applications to the Department for Education, which would bring additional capacity within Nottinghamshire. And we, as partners with the multi-academy trusts, we're providing data looking at the areas of need where it would be most beneficial. So that could be another route for additional places that we can factor into our support. There's a lack of clarity currently around the future high needs capital allowance. So we've had a good sum of money, which has provided us with the opportunity to build and extend provision, but there's no news yet as to what will happen beyond March 2024. So there's a bit of uncertainty in terms of future planning. The demand for special school places is ever shifting, depending on a number of factors. If there's less requests for EHC assessments, then that demand will be lower. If parents feel confident in the support and provision that their mainstream school can provide, to meet need, and the funding is there to enable that, that can reduce the need for specialist places. It's really about ensuring that the children and young people who will most benefit from that place access that place in special provision. But we do all we can to meet need locally. And we are still awaiting the outcome of the SEND Green Paper consultation. The implementation plan, I think I've mentioned, is expected early in 2023. We had anticipated some recommendations coming out from the government in response to the consultation before Christmas. That was then moved to early January 2023. It's now looking increasingly more like it will be sometime in February when we get that. But that will be really helpful, although it is, our direction anyway is about a number of the key themes within the Green Paper. But it will be helpful to have that in terms of future direction as well. So we're waiting for that. Although clearly any changes in terms of implementation will take some time to come through, particularly if they require legislation. But there is no recommendation within the Green Paper, or nothing to signify that there'll be a change to the threshold levels for education and healthcare plans. So it still is really essential that we are increasing that confidence in mainstream and planning for our specialist provision. On the slides, which I'm sure will come out with the minutes, Chair, I've just put the contact details for myself and Group Manager Cameron Human and Group Manager for ICDS should additional information be required following the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I don't think you introduced any new information on those slides, just highlighting some key information, which is very helpful. Thank you very much. I'm going to bring Councillor Darby, but I guess you're tag teaming it with Councillor Welsh first, and then Councillor Lee. So over to you, Councillor Darby.
Yes, so this is on behalf of Councillor Darby. Do you think these rising figures may well be the tip of the iceberg? I want to tell you my story. My son suffers from special educational needs, and I've repeatedly told the school that he needs more help. I'm happy to raise these concerns privately, but after becoming frustrated with the school's response, I contacted Nottinghamshire County Council, and whilst they were helpful, I faced a complicated 45-minute phone call, and now, 6 months on, we are no nearer to successfully resolving the issue. So much so that we are thinking of removing my son from his school and seeking an alternative, as his education is being severely impacted by his school's attitude, and the long process at NCC is hugely frustrating. That's why I said I'm certain these figures are the tip of the iceberg. So my questions are, if a request is made to school for SEND support for a child, are Nottinghamshire County Council automatically informed? If so, how many cases are ongoing? How many children across Nottinghamshire are waiting on SEND support? I feel the complexities of the system will lead to many parents giving up, many children not receiving the appropriate support, and the education system being impacted. Could we have a future report into the process involved in getting a child SEND support?
Thank you for that. And Councillor Darby, obviously you've shared quite a personal, particular case, and I'm sure that can be discussed offline, but we can come to the questions you clearly asked at the end there. Peter, please.
Thank you. And I'm sure colleagues will also want to contribute, including Charles Savage, who will probably want to come in and talk around the level of need within mainstream schools and children who receive SEN support. I think it's a really emotive subject. It's a very personal subject, and it's one that impacts many of us who have children with additional needs. It can be a complicated and complex system, and it's important we try and make it as simple to navigate as possible, and we learn and listen to experiences to do so. Is this the tip of the iceberg? We are seeing an increase in, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of EHC assessment requests, and mainstream schools have an increase in children with complex and challenging needs that they have to meet and are expected to meet within mainstream settings. which puts pressure on settings as well, and on families. They're, post-pandemic, there are children who have missed out on assessment and diagnosis, which will store up further challenge and exacerbate issues. And there are children who have not had the socialisation that you would have expected in the early years, which brings with it additional challenges in speech-language communication, interaction. So is it the tip of the iceberg? Yeah, I think we're in for a long period of time where we will see the effects of some of these things and rises in meeting the needs of children with special educational needs and disabilities, definitely. Charles, can I bring you in? Thank you.
Happy to do so. Thanks, Peter. In terms of I agree it is an issue to do with the tip of the iceberg. In the report, there's a phrase that's used which talks about parental trust and confidence, and that's certainly at the core of this issue. And so it's not just the case that we have pressures in terms of an increased demand for EHC assessments, and then everything else at the earlier stages of special educational needs are absolutely fine. No, I think what we're seeing is it's that there are those pressures at all levels. So when it comes to, I think Councillor Darby asked a very specific question, which was that if a request is made by a parent for their child with regard to having sent sport, is the council automatically informed? No, it isn't, and probably shouldn't need to be. From the point of view of, if we think about special educational needs as being, we talk about it as a graduated response. We talk about it as, so the first concern a parent may raise might be with their teacher in terms of, is my child making the progress that I would expect, or the same progress that other children in their class will be made, that are making. And the expectation would be that at the very early stages, that query that the parent has raised would be dealt with by their child's class teacher. And then if that wasn't sufficient, the expectation would be that the teacher would then speak to the school's special educational needs coordinator, and that might actually answer the question. So the child may then get some special needs support within their class, but organised by the school, by themselves. And there wouldn't be a need at that point of view for at that level for the school to inform the county council. If they were to do so, if we think about people talking about estimates of special educational needs being something in the region of maybe 20% of the school population, there's no way that the council would be able to respond to 20% of the total school population. That said, if the special educational needs coordinator felt that they needed to access additional support outside of what the school already had available to it through its ordinary budget, and that might be from the point of view of advisory support from specialist teachers or from educational psychologists or other practitioners, or if they felt that the school needed more funding to support them being able to put in place particular programs for that particular youngster. At the first level, the school would be able to access that support, and again, without an education healthcare assessment or plan that would be needed. And that's quite unusual that we've set that in place in Nottinghamshire, because we want schools to be able to have ready access to that support and to that additional funding without needing to go through quite a long process. If that level of support, additional funding, wasn't available at their local level, there wasn't sufficient available at their local level, the school could again apply to the local authority for access to part of what we refer to as the high level needs budget. Again, it's a fairly easy for schools to be able to do that, and then we have a panel made up of local authority officers and representatives from schools who would consider those requests and try to moderate them and make decisions regarding the allocation of that funding in a way that's fair and transparent and proportionate. And it would be in addition to what already the schools put in place. But then, as Peter said, the only other thing that might be available outside of that additional support would be access to a special school placement, and in those situations an educational healthcare assessment and plan would be needed. So I don't know if that answers some of those questions. There certainly is pressure in the system. Less so to do with funding. I don't see we don't see lots of evidence of that in terms of those budgets being pressured so much. I think that the availability of support service advice and guidance, there's a level of pressure there that's being experienced by our specialist teacher services and our educational psychology service. There's pressure there, and there's certainly, as is referred to in the report, pressure from the point of view of more parents wanting a special school place for their child than we have special school places available.
Some of the points. Councillor Lee, please.
Chairman, thank you. I see this from three perspectives, quite interesting perspective. I've been the governor at Orchard School, that obviously was a school that this council brought forward, and they've just announced extra places. You represent one side, I represent the other side. That's great news. I'm also the father of a child that suffers heavily with dyslexia, and myself, I suffer with dyslexia as well. And we have also really struggled because my child doesn't meet the advanced needs. We've had to pay privately to have a dyslexia assessment because we can't get one through the normal measures. We've spoken about this privately, but the old school, I won't mention the name, we felt seriously let down. We moved her to a school that was actually on paper required improvements, and now great news, it's now being offsteaded as good. But the improvement quality that we saw for her with moving schools was incredible, and the school were unbelievably good. And sometimes the fit of the child in the school that they're in just doesn't fit, and everybody fits everywhere. And sometimes a move does them, in my opinion, just my personal opinion, does them well. And it's a brave decision to make. We made the decision, and in that requirement, it was well for her. But is it not time that we need to look at bringing back dyslexia assessments? Because what I find personally is that people are going through the advanced requirements of SEND and getting the children thinking, when actually a cheaper, quicker method is dyslexia assessment, when we can put things in place at the school level without needing to go further. And I'm going to stop there because I've made lots of comments, so I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I don't know who's best suited to the question. Probably the Secretary of State for Education, but we'll try you first, Pete.
I think it's probably fair to say that a number of schools use dyslexia screeners more than assessments, but not blanket across all. Like Councillor Lee, I also have a child who struggles significantly with dyslexia, quite severe dyslexia, and it wasn't picked up until my child was in year 11, just in advance of sitting his GCSE examinations. He'd obviously managed through his school life until that point with it not being picked up, despite really high quality of teaching. So I think the more awareness schools can have of the needs of children and investigate them in a timely manner, the better. And anything we can do to support with that, we would want to be doing as a local authority. I think that Councillor Lee also raised another point which was really pertinent, which is about the fit of a child with a school. Now, every school should be able to meet the needs of every child. And this is something that Charles and I have discussed and talked to schools about. But there's also, I think, other factors come into play around capacity and resource and equity. And I know that some schools will feel that they are unfairly put upon by being inclusive to have additional children with education healthcare plans or additional needs compared with others who could be equally well placed to meet the needs of a child. And that can then impact on the experience that a child will have in terms of resource. So there's something about fairness and equity as well as fit of school.
I'd just like to say that I was absolutely privileged when I was the governor at Orchard School that this authority brought forward the new Orchard School. We were working off two sites. It was very expensive to run. It was something that this authority pushed and this authority brought forward. And then to hear that they're bringing more places forward, yes, we have a shortfall, but it definitely feels that we're going in the right direction. And I do welcome that we both represent Boulderton, and we have lots of children that use that facility. I know Maureen Dobson fought strongly for that as well, and Stuart Wallace. But I'd just like to thank this authority, because if it wasn't for this authority, I don't think we would have Orchard Skill. So I'd like to personally thank them.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. You're a big champion of Orchard School, and I know you did good service, and I'm privileged to have it in my patch. I'm pleased to see it expanding, so that's good. Councillor Creamer, please.
Yeah, just very specifically, bullet point 28, and we have applied for the new free school, but I think when he was actually reporting it, so we're putting the data together to find the most beneficial place, etc. So the question is that data still being put together? And if it is together, can we know where the beneficial place is? If not, could it be actually in a redacted form of some sort so that we can actually look at it? But yeah, is that process of gathering the data still going through, or has it been actually sent to the government?
Peter.
Thank you. Am I on? I think I'm there. Yes, so the free school application has been submitted, the free school request to the DFE by Nottinghamshire County Council. That's gone through internal decision making here in terms of the data that's contained within it. I'll need to check with colleagues, but in terms of making that available, I can't see any reason why not. But I will look into that outside of this meeting for you, Councillor Creamer, if that's okay. If that goes forward, it will be a very similar process to the one that we've experienced previously in terms of a free school presumption for who would manage and run a free school. In terms of the area that was being looked at, I think there's Ravensdale is mentioned within the presentation as a pre-development, so there's some design work taking place around Ravensdale, pending a formal decision on the site that any free school, special educational needs free school would be situated on. There was another site, I think, which has also been looked at, which is in Ollerton. I think the initial site surveys, and I don't work within place, but the initial site surveys showed that was a very challenging, an even more challenging site than the Ravensdale one, and wouldn't have been as viable an option. But all of that data will come through when the decision is made about where that site would be. Both sites are compromised. Both sites are also within an area which would be of need looking at the data. But I'm sure we can make that available.
Yeah. Quickly on that, you mentioned the Ollerton one. Would that be part of the rebuild that's going ahead, or brand new?
I think I'll pass over to you, Peter, but I believe the Ollerton one has been discounted.
It was discounted because of the ground was we couldn't build on it. It's what we would require. So no, not connected with the SRP.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bailey, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm looking at page 39 of the total pack and page 7 of the report, in particular diagram 5. Now I know it's been talked about how different parents perceive different experiences depending on where they are, different cases and whatnot, and we're looking at how we are meeting demand. Can I just ask a query on? So obviously Ashfield is the highest, and I believe Rushcliffe is the lowest. Is this within the realms of expectations for the council, or would we be expect to see Rushcliffe higher up that list to make sure that we are meeting the demands? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Peter.
So very loud. Look, Ashfield has the highest number of new EHC plans by district. It is an area which has, there's lots of complexity behind children with special educational needs. There's no formula here, children within Rushcliffe clearly have additional needs as well. But in terms of meeting the demand, we've focused our provision within areas where there's higher demand to reduce travel. And we've also done that where there's good travel routes to enable access from other areas. So in the Rushcliffe area, we've got one special school. And in the Ashfield and neighbouring Mansfield area, we've got a number of both special school provision, proposed future provision, but also there's a higher prevalence of alternative provision schools as well within those areas. So it kind of follows suit. I don't think it's as simple as saying we would expect to see more children with additional needs in this area than that. It's really difficult to predict because it's dependent on a number of factors. So it's hard for me to give a straighter answer than that.
Yeah, so I mean, the main query is if there's anything structural on the ground, for example. So I know we've talked about that graduated response. I mean, for example, are we confident that that's being done better in Rushcliffe where lessons can be learned elsewhere, or something similar to that?
I think not. I don't think there's anything we can learn from that. If we stack that up against something like permanent exclusions or fixed term suspensions, you'd see that practice differs in each area. I think it would be difficult to say that Rushcliffe is more inclusive, and that's why there's why there are a lower number of EHCs. I don't think that would stack up based on experience.
Thank you very much for those questions and answers. Councillor Calhoun, please.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to say over in Mansfield, obviously, there's very often ad hoc response to both children and parents. Parents are extremely frustrated because we have incredibly long waiting lists for services for children. Lots of children are seen or perceived as problem children rather than children having a problem. And they're not actually getting a lot of the support that they do require. So, for instance, we never had young children permanently excluded. We've seen permanently excluded children at a primary school level. We've also got children on part-time timetables. I've got one at the moment in Woodhouse that's been on a part-time timetable, and that's 2 hours per day for several months. And Mum went into the school on Friday at 9 o'clock and was still sat there at 3:30 p.m. waiting to see someone to speak to. Now, there's no wonder families get incredibly upset because they want the best for their children. And I will say, some of our academies are very, very good. Some of them are rubbish at supporting families and children. And sometimes it is about money. It is about lots of schools had teaching assistants to support the class teacher. Because they've gone academy, it's run as a business. Yes, a lot of money is ring fenced for children, but if more was put into that, they wouldn't have needed to have got rid of teaching assistants that do a valuable job in the classroom. And when a teacher's trying to teach 40 children and they may have 4 or 5 children with additional needs, that's when problems occur. And that's what we're seeing now. We did see a decrease in EHCP plans, probably in COVID, because for some children it was great. They didn't have to go to school. Those children that had anxiety and that, they weren't being made to go out of the door. Since they've had to go back into the school setting, that's where some of the problems have arisen. And again, when you're in a primary school, you're usually in one classroom with one teacher. When you go into the secondary school, you've got a number of teachers, a number of classrooms, and that's where you can see that it can't be managed and maintained, some of the issues that these children are having on a daily basis, and it needs to be managed more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, look, thank you for the comments. I acknowledge those comments, and all I can say in response is that some of that I fully agree with in terms of the additional stresses and struggles following long periods of time where children weren't in school, particularly those who didn't have a strong transition from primary to secondary and are now in a very different environment, and that is very, very challenging. We work with our schools and our academies equally. I think it doesn't matter whether you're an academy or a maintained school. Your level of inclusivity and the ethos in the school will be set by the leadership within that school and the staffing. I also recognise the importance of teaching assistants in providing additional support for children within school settings. As you know, I was a primary school teacher myself. I ended up teaching in secondary school for exactly that reason, that secondary schools need to understand and support children who are coming into a very unfamiliar environment from a very safe, small, contained environment. And I know a number of schools that do that in different ways, secondary academies who manage that differently. Levels of exclusion do worry me because there should be very rare occasions where children should require to be removed from school, and it should only ever be on the most significant health and safety grounds, really. The policies within some schools will be less tolerant than others, and that's something which is supported by Ofsted in terms of the behaviour guidance that they've issued unhelpfully for reducing permanent exclusion rates. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. At this point, I know colleagues, a number of colleagues have spoken about EHCPs and asked questions about that. In January, we're going to launch a review to gain a better understanding of the issues surrounding EHCPs and the challenges that it's facing, examine the process and put forward recommendations. So the scope, I'm reassured that the scope's being written now, and colleagues will be invited to be part of that review shortly, but it will begin in January. So keep a look out on your emails for that invite. Councillor Welsh, please.
Yeah, so to start off with, it's page 38, paragraph 3, where it says, in September 2022, 95 children and young people in mainstream settings without an appropriate special school placement being available until September 2023. Is that a normal waiting time, a whole school year? I know I've had people come to me where it's been 18 months and it's been even longer than that. And could I ask, while they're in these mainstream settings as such, are they really in these mainstream settings? Or are they being at home and having a couple of hours alternative provision every day? Because that will unduly affect that child's education. Anecdotally, we've heard of 2 cases. Anecdotally, I hear quite a lot of cases because of my friends are who they work for. So, is this an ongoing issue, and is it a problem? What on average are people waiting with regards to this? It's my understanding, and I'd be happy to be proven wrong, that at one point we didn't have a place anywhere in any special school. Last year, so when people were asking for special, there wasn't a special school place available in Nottinghamshire for a child. That isn't, and I'd love to be proven wrong on that, but that's what I was told by the people that were asking for it, educational. My other question relates to something that Councillor Bailey actually raised, where it's where we're looking at where those new EHCPs are by district, and we see that Ashfield has 337. So my question is, when you then go to the summary of current capital projects, Brackenhill in Ashfield, there's going to be 9 places. So how does the amount of EHCPs and the needs for a certain area reflect where those current capital projects, or is it like in the case of Carlton Digby School, which is in my patch, which is obviously higher needs, that people will travel further afield? And if so, are we doing anything to combat that? Because the pressure that is put on parents when they have to travel across the county, and the cost of putting children in taxis and putting them in minibuses is absolutely huge. So at the moment, we've got this lovely graph in front of us that says Ashfield, it's not lovely to see, obviously, but it's really clear in what it's telling us. It's quite clear in where it's saying where some of those higher needs are. So are the capital projects reflecting where those needs are? Because the other important thing about children with special educational needs and their parents that have so much on their plate, is unbelievable. The things that they have to fight for, they shouldn't have to fight for. That's a discussion for another day. It should be more where they live and localised, should it not? That and then last but not least, the DFE did provide some funding that we asked for with regards to SEND, and I always think some of the officers that pushed for that, you know, all credit to them because they really did push for that funding. In the report where it talks about financial implications, where it talks about the ability, page 41, paragraph 32, where it talks about to cover ability to cover deficits, reserves, ring fence of deficits from kind of the wider financial position. That paragraph really actually worries me. And I think it should worry us all. And that's not to say that officers aren't working really, really hard to meet these needs. Because what this report is saying, in as a nutshell, we're doing some really great work. We've got some capital projects. We think we're okay with funding at the moment, but it's going to get harder in the future, and we're not going to have enough places. That's what this report says. So if we put it with that and that review, I'm not sure that I could agree. I'm not sure after considering those recommendations that this is something I could put my hand up to, because I think there needs to be an alternative recommendation. This is scrutiny. This isn't a Children and Young People's Committee report. This is scrutiny. And within here, it's saying we're not going to have enough money and we're not going to have enough places. So there's something more that has to come back, some greater information with regards to this, with regards to how we're managing resources and what we really need to do next. Because at the moment, this report doesn't fully tell us that. And that's not to say there isn't lots of information in this report and it isn't a good report, but for me, it doesn't meet scrutiny standards.
Thank you. Just before I bring colleagues in, this agenda item is here because I requested it to be in the work programme. And I think when I was appointed in May last year to be Vice Chair of the Children's Committee, I took quite an interest into place planning, particularly around SEND, because as the report says, there's 90-odd children in mainstream settings that should be in special educational needs settings, and we need to do more to deliver that. And what I'm conscious of, the Ollerton site was referenced earlier, so I'll talk about that. You know, it was 6 months that was being looked at, and then they came to me after 6 months and said, Councillor Smith, that one site we're looking at to deliver those places is contaminated. We're going to have to look elsewhere. Now, in the private sector, you wouldn't get that. You'd be looking at 5 or 6 sites and they'd bring a report forward and tell you which one they can deliver quicker and at what cost, and then allow people like the Cabinet to decide which one they're going to pick and deliver the places, because we need the places. And I'm conscious that in the children's world, Peter, Colin and Councillor Taylor can tell property, we need, there's 337 children in Ashfield with the HCP, we need a special school there. Then that's handed over to property colleagues, and you lose some of the levers that you previously had. And I know Councillor Taylor has regular meetings with property to keep on top of that, but the levers to pull are still in somebody else's hands. And that's why this paper's here, because I think, to echo absolutely what Councillor Welsh has said, there is more that a scrutiny committee can do to assist that process, and we, if we wish to today, can vote to launch a spotlight review, I think it's called. Martin will tell me if I've got that terminology wrong, where we can sit with Councillor Taylor in a more in-depth discussion and say, right, tell us where you want the special school places, and then we can go away to property and say, how are you going to deliver those? What sites are there? How much is it going to cost? Have we got the budget for that? And I really think that is a vitally important piece of work that this committee can do, and I want us to do that. And I think it can hugely benefit Peter, Colin and Councillor Taylor in meeting these needs, because if you look at table 2, paragraph 30, it says we plan to deliver 271 places by August 2025. Well, even at the lower end of the estimate, that's still 14 places short of what the estimates are, 285 to 490. Obviously 490 is a huge worst case scenario, as it were. So I do think this committee can play a vital role in helping this council deliver those in a more private sector way of let's look at more than one site at a time, and how quickly can we deliver them, how much they're going to cost, and Councillor Taylor take that to cabinet, as it were. So I want that to be one of the recommendations, but I'll let Peter come in if I've missed anything on Councillor Welsh's point, or Colin, sorry.
I'll invite Peter in, Chair, if I may, in a moment. I just wanted to have a little bit of point of clarification, because I think we're at risk of conflating two things. So all children who are in a special school require an education, health and care plan. Not all children with an education, health and care plan should be in a special school. So if you're a child with a physical disability, or indeed dyslexia, or indeed a hearing impairment, and you require an education, health and care plan, that doesn't mean you should necessarily be excluded from mainstream schooling, because school for children with a special educational needs and disability has got to be about our aspiration of what kind of adult life that those children might have, including being included in work, employment, training, etc. And part of that, for many children with an additional need, won't require an education and healthcare plan. Some will require an education and healthcare plan. How the school can make reasonable adjustments for that child to be included within mainstream school with their friends from up the street, and local community, etc. For a small group of children, and there isn't enough placements in Nottinghamshire, and that's why we've got the capital programme, and that's why we've got the ambition about applying. But I just wanted to be really clear, because I think we were at risk of conflating EHC plans and demand for EHC plans with number of special schools.
Thank you, Councillor Pedro-Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the information this morning. It's sort of it's fired a load of facts and figures at me that perhaps suggests I need to change my question. So I see here in the report, in diagram 1, that we have a 273% increase in EHC plans in Nottinghamshire in the last, or since January 2015, extrapolated up to January 2025. So that's the expected increase. So, given that we're going to have I think what is certainly justified a review, we obviously have ongoing issues now. So I suppose my unfair question at this stage, and I asked this also because I believe I listened to a education expert who was also talking about SEND education needs, and they were saying, and there was no challenge from any other education experts in the interview, that government policy has sort of left education, in whatever guise we look at it, lagging behind funding in the last 12 years. So it's almost becoming a Cinderella service amongst the other competing services. So I suppose my unfair question, and maybe perhaps it's Councillor Taylor that might need to ask this, is if we were to put it right today, I know that's virtually impossible always, but if we were to put it right today, what sort of percentage increase do we need to increase the budget to give Colin and his various teams the adequate resources up front? And also, if I may ask, what support are we currently offering mainstream schools and special needs schools to ensure that pay rises do not have a detrimental impact on education? Staffing costs, I understand, can make up to 80% of school budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Pedro-Horn. Councillor Taylor.
First question, I couldn't give you an absolute figure, and I don't think it's a linear dilemma, shall we say, to start with. So I don't think it helps particularly to ask sort of a linear reductive question that tries to get it down to a single value. So I can't give you an answer about how much of a percentage is needed to fix it all today, if it was possible to conjure that many places anyway. As for pay rises, I will stand corrected by officers. I am not aware that there is a staffing crisis in our special schools. So I suppose the way that I would look at it is, for example, in the same way that pay rises, national pay rises, will impact, let's say, us setting our budget as a council shortly, because we will have to absorb those pay rises into our overall bills. I accept that pay rises will impact the budgets of all schools. So we do require the funding. The schools require the funding in order to meet the demands that are placed on them. But unless officers tell me differently, I am not aware of, have not been hearing of, staffing crises in our schools as a result of salaries.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Anything to add to that, Colin?
If I may add something, I'm going back to diagram 2 in Peter's report at paragraph, I think it's 13. Yes, 13 on pages 36 of 60. Yeah, and I go back a couple of years. So I arrived in October 2015, and Nottinghamshire's dedicated school high needs block was just £50 million, about £51 million. And we see ourselves 7 years later. Yeah, and the high needs block dedicated school grant for Nottinghamshire is now £102 million. Peter mentioned in his presentation that Kent County Council's overspend on its high need block this year is £107 million. So they're overspending more money on their budget than Nottinghamshire has an entire budget. Yep, and successive administrations have fought very hard in Nottinghamshire around fairer funding for schools and fairer funding for high needs block in particular. Government has made points that in terms of the 151, 52 top tier local authorities, they've grouped them into 3 groups. Those authorities where they are so concerned about their overspend of high needs block, they're on something called safety valve programme. Yeah, in Kent, in places like Suffolk, yeah, we're on one of those. Yeah, and there are about 22, 23 local authorities out of 152. There's then a group of local authorities that are still overspent, significantly overspent on their high needs block, who are in another programme called Value for Money.
Yep.
Yeah, programme from the Department of Education, and then there's a group of about 60 local authorities. So just short of about 40% of local authorities where their confidence around the management of the high needs block is higher. Yeah, and Nottinghamshire is in that last category. Yeah, and the Department for Education centrally point other local authorities towards Nottinghamshire around how are you managing that for the outcomes that you achieve. So it's not that when you look at the data, the outcomes for our children with special educational needs appear to be good on the data. So I make that point. And government have just announced that those local authorities with that level of overspend, where they were expected at some point in the near future to inherit that overspend into their core budget, so we go out of DSG and we become a debt not to the dedicated school grant, but a debt to the local authority. Yeah, that decision has been suspended again now for a further 3 years at least. Yeah. And there is no reward for Nottinghamshire around being a prudent local authority. The other thing I would say is that when I arrived in October 2015, I did a succession of visits to youth clubs, mobile youth clubs, foster carers, residential children's homes, social work teams, and our special schools. Within the first 3 weeks that I was here, I went to Orchard School, and it became very clear to me, as plain as my nose and my face, that school needed to be rebuilt. It had at least 2 different sites. Councillor Lee, as you know, the site in the town, to give members some who don't know the school, the old school as it was, the site in the town had a significant number of children whose mobility was hugely impaired and had very, very specialist wheelchairs and ambulators. Some children were lying down all day, every day. Yeah. But those children were required to be educated in a site that was 16 concrete steps from the site at the lower level. And those children needed to be taken out of their wheelchair, held by a carer, whilst the wheelchair was folded up, put inside because the door on the building wasn't big enough to get the wheelchair through. Yeah. And when those children went for lunch, yeah, or to the sports hall to do whatever it was they were doing, they had to come out of the school, through a side gate, through a private car park, onto the main highway, down the pavement, back into the school. Yeah, now, I took within 3 more weeks the leader of the then leader of the council, yeah, Councillor Alan Rhodes, to that school, and we had a conversation around as plain as the nose in my face, and indeed yours, Councillor Rhodes. This school needs to be rebuilt, and at that point, that administration and the successive administration worked to have that school built. And I think it's one of Nottingshire's great achievements to push and push and push for that school to be rebuilt on a single site at £20 million, I think, and growing. And we've not only got a better school, we've got more children at that school. And if you looked at it as a unit cost, about how many children are now educated on that site, yeah, for the total cost, the unit cost is reduced. So we've got a better school, cheaper per child, yeah, offering better outcomes, and something to be, as Councillor Lee knows as Governor, something to be really excited about. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Colin, and thank you.
Sorry, just to finish, the issue around staffing costs. I think it's just important to recognise that that we increase the budget that we give available for mainstream schools to have provision of teaching assistants and other measures to support children in mainstream, but also within the special school estate. There is a minimum funding guarantee uplift that the government have rolled out for special schools, which we're working through, and I've not got the detail yet, but Friday's announcement also included additional percentage rise for special schools to support with those issues. So that will go some way to support. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you, colleagues, for that important discussion. I'm going to hand over to Martin on recommendations, but one of them will certainly be to launch a joint scrutiny task and finish review with property colleagues and children colleagues to highlight SEND requirements and ask property what they're doing to deliver those for us. And we can only do one task and finish review at a time, so EHCP has already started. So we'll complete the EHCP one and then launch the SEND provision one in around about March time, but the scope will be written up before that, and colleagues will be invited to take part in that as well. And I think we invite people from across the council. You don't just have to be on this committee, do you?
No, you can nominate.
You can nominate people from across council to take our place, which is helpful. So I'll go to the recommendations, then I'll come to you. Oh right, okay, sorry.
So I asked a question with regards to page 38, paragraph 3, with regards to 95 children that were waiting a year for a special school placement being available. And my question was, is this usual? How many special school places do we have at the moment? And what happens to these children and young people while they're waiting for this special school place? Because what I'm being told is they put on an alternative timetable, which is sometimes 2 hours a day. And I think that's quite a pertinent question as to when you say those recommendations as to whether the scrutiny committee actually agrees with it, because this is the information really that we should know about. I know what people are telling me. I know other councillors in this room that are what they are being told, but we need to have that clarified here and publicly.
Sure. Councillor Taylor indicated.
Thank you. I'll start and then I'll hand over to officers. I think it's important to note that special school places or support work to do with EHCPs, but I think you're speaking specifically about places in special schools. Children the majority of children who require the extra support are not necessarily, let's say, identifiable preschool. So we can identify some very obvious needs preschool, so children who are born with certain conditions, for instance, but often needs will manifest in the early years of schooling, and as a consequence an EHCP will be sought, granted, and a place needed. So I think it's important to start with that understanding, because it is not obvious what the numbers might be in terms of need. So you're saying 95 children because that's what's in the report, this paragraph. That might be the case at present, that the numbers might be different. You cannot tell what the needs might be until the needs emerge and are actually identified, clarified through an EHCP, and then the requirement for a place. So I think that's the important first thing. I can't speak to the anecdotal evidence that you reference, but what you're saying tells me that there is something about the experience of some families with the schools that their children are attending in terms of whether or not those children are getting appropriate support. So a child would normally move schools at certain age points. So you do first admission at age 4, 5, you do transition at age 11, 12. Moving to a special school can be anywhere in a child's educational journey at any age and at any point in a calendar year. It's not always the 1st of September. So the whole thing is a movable feast, and there's no rationale to me, and there's certainly no process that I'm aware of that says if we can't find a place, we're going to stop mainstream schooling and that child will go on to AP or being at home until a place is found. That's a nonsense. So if you've got specific examples and specific anecdotes, I think we need to talk about those offline. But the notion that at the point that need is identified and place is not, that mainstream education stops for a child seems nonsensical to me. But I will pass over to officers for a response specifically on those numbers.
Thank you. Sorry, my laptop has just died. It's run out of power, unfortunately. The number of 95 was, as this report was written, and there's currently 53 children in mainstream settings who still require a special school for September next year. So that's come down. There's about a churn of about 100 children each year in terms of those who leave and those new places that generates. We have got, there are places available in the special school estate across Nottingham. I can't give you an exact number, but I know that there are places in certainly one school that I know have a number of spaces available currently, and it's filling the space with making it available for the right child with EHC where that's named on their plan. There's additional provision, as we referred to in the capital projects, of the new projects that were being delivered in December. And we are currently going through a process of filling those spaces. So the Stubborn Wood satellite provision has a number of spaces available. I think there's a small number of children who will be starting in a couple of weeks' time after the new year, and more coming on as that sets up over a 2-week period. So there is provision available. Regarding the part-time timetables, I think that's potentially a kind of different focus of work. I understand it in relation to the SEND. There's really clear guidance on part-time timetables for schools from the Department for Education that should be adhered to, and where that's not being adhered to, then that should be addressed. The local authority monitor part-time timetables. We request returns from schools. We challenge schools to get those returns, and we scrutinise them, and that happens through the Fair Access team that is managed by Karen. So we do have oversight of part-time timetables and part-time provision. Do we get all the information all the time? Possibly not. We know what we know. It would worry me and it would worry any others, I think, if any child was on a 2-hour a day timetable for a long period of time. But there is provision for reduced timetables, but it's really specific circumstances. It needs to be monitored, reviewed, and worked towards an increase back into full-time mainstream. It's not acceptable to be left floundering on a inadequate provision. Yeah.
And of course, it goes without saying, if colleagues are aware of situations like that, they need to be flagged through the usual processes. Okay, over to Mawson, please, with the additional recommendations.
So I'll go through them all. So it's been noted that effective planning is taking place to ensure that there is sufficient specialist educational provision for children and young people in Nottinghamshire. Number 2, that the challenges around ensuring that there are sufficient resources available to support children and young people with special educational needs to remain in mainstream settings be noted. That the following issues be progressed. There's an item on the same green paper be added to the Children and Families Work Programme. That a progress report on the provision of special educational places be brought to a future meeting of the Children and Families Select Committee. And finally, there's a scrutiny task and finish review on potential locations for the provision of additional specialist educational placements be carried out.
Thank you. I move those recommendations. Francis, to second, please. Thank you. All those in favour of those recommendations, please show. Thank you. Any against? And any abstentions?
I'm really sorry, but I couldn't hear the first two recommendations, so I'm just in a quandary. I'm really sorry.
I can get them repeated, but the first two were the ones written in the book. But
Okay. Sorry, I sound a bit hoarse, don't I? Really. There's an item on the same green paper be added to the Children and Families Work Programme. That a progress report on the provision of special educational places be brought to a future meeting of the Children and Families Select Committee, and that a scrutiny task and finish review on the potential locations for the provision of additional specialist educational placements be carried out.
thank you. So they've been moved and seconded. I'll take the vote again. All those in favour of those recommendations, please show. Thank you. Any abstentions? One. Thank you. Any against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much, colleagues. Item 7 is the response from the Cabinet member on how awareness of the financial support for the cost of school uniform is raised. The response is detailed in on page 43. I don't suppose the Cabinet member has anything further to add, so we just note that. I remind colleagues that this committee will be playing a review into the policy, so I don't see any reason for comments or debates, so we'll take that as noted. Item 8 is the work programme, and I think I hand back over to Martin, please.
Yeah, so the work programme's there. Just note, and obviously we'll get it updated with what's been agreed today. Obviously the chair mentioned about the review of education, health and care plans. The scope's virtually being finalised, so once we've got that done, we'll send that out to all members, asking for volunteers for the group. If you don't want to participate yourself, but you can nominate someone from your group to take your place on the review. So that'd be really good if you can get in touch with us about that when that goes out. And then just a reminder to keep your eye on the forward plan every time that comes out, just in case there's any areas that you'd like to consider for pre-decision scrutiny, and if so, just let myself and the chair know.
Thank you, Martin. Do any members have any comments or suggestions for the work programme? Councillor Welsh?
Not necessarily for the work programme, but just something that scrutiny could perhaps do in the future. There was discussion about the parent-led programmes on a previous agenda, and Lawrence Jones mentioned some new programmes that are probably different from when I worked in Children and Young People Services and delivered parent programmes. And I was wondering whether we would, perhaps some of us, be able to go and meet some of those people that are delivering those programmes and find some more information out about them. The parenting programmes, that is. There was a bit of discussion going back and forth, and I think if anyone would be interested to know, I just would be interested to know. I mean, it makes me a loser or what, but no, I would be very interested to know what these new programmes are and how they are being, and how effective they are, and what's happening and where, particularly with early years.
We would task Martin to go away and work with officers on how we can do that. But yes, we'll do that. There was no amendments to the work programme, so we don't need to vote. All that's left for me to do is wish you a Merry Christmas and thank you for taking part this year. Councillor Callahan.
I'd like my thanks given to Keith Girling because he donated Meadow House for the gifts of Christmas, who actually delivered 700 Christmas hampers to vulnerable families across Mansfield and Ashfield. And all of those families, so they had the big Christmas hamper, but for all children in those families, they received 4 Christmas presents as well each, as did the parent have a gift as well. So that was from a charity in Mansfield, and Notts County Council gifted Meadow House the bottom floor for that to be able to take place, and it was greatly appreciated.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that. We'll note that for Councillor Gelling. Thank you, everybody.